Everyone, good evening. Let's get started. Good evening. Thank you so much for taking time to come out to this event this evening. Today's topic is going to be on how to qualify for more rental properties, and it's going to be done by Layne Walters, our mortgage broker here. Okay, let's do a super quick market update. So these are November stats from the Calgary Real Estate Board, and the benchmark residential price has gone up 10% year over year compared to last year. Detached prices are up 13.2%, and the highest growth was observed in the row house or townhouse sector. Okay, and primarily all this growth is being in the lower price points. The apartments and row houses are driven by the affordability factor. Okay, interest rates are high. Not many people can qualify for a large enough mortgage, so they're going to something with a lower price point. And then you could see the benchmark price by sector.
This is not including the new builds.
Yeah, this doesn't include new builds. This is just resale on MLS. So these are benchmark prices in various quadrants of the city. And you can see the east quadrant, so this would be like your Forest Lawn, Dover, and surrounding areas have the highest growth. And again, it's an affordability thing because they typically had the lowest price point, so it was the easiest place for most people to buy into, right? This slide here is about the secondary suite Amnesty program. So for those of you who are not very familiar with this program, the city was running a program that was slated to end at the end of this year, where you could convert an existing illegal secondary suite to a legal suite. Good news for everyone, the program is now extended for another 3 years, okay? So if you have a suite that's built prior to 2018, then you can legalize your suite under a very relaxed set of requirements, which I've kind of put a box over here. So you just need your egress windows, smoke detectors that are interconnected between up and down, and what am I missing? Drywalling the mechanical room and any other parts of the basement suite that are not drywalled currently. All right, now I'll hand it off to Layne Walters, who's going to talk about qualifying.
So this one is putting this presentation together. It's actually really challenging, and the reason that it's challenging, I'm familiar with the material on an individual basis, but the thing that makes it the most challenging is something it's very personal to everybody's circumstance, not just their goals, but their circumstance. If a couple is purchasing something and they already own a property or two, it's significantly different than if a single individual is looking for the first house, right? So I could talk about everything from an RSP strategy to save up a little bit more down payment to buy your first house. So that's not really relevant to a couple who already owns a few properties. But if we're talking about a 2-income household and how you should qualify and structure yourself to be able to buy more properties or have better access to different properties, long-term portfolio building as a couple, of course, that's irrelevant to somebody who's single and buying their first house. So it's really actually challenging. The one thing that I will say right from the top is that everybody's different. So it's going to be very specific. Make sure that you are working with a mortgage broker. I'd say obviously I'm biased because I am a mortgage broker, but if you work with a banker and you go to TD and you talk to TD and say, hey, where should I get my next mortgage? Well, what's their answer going to be? It's going to be right here. We could do that for you. And TD is a good lender, but you don't want to use all your TD mortgages up in your first few properties, which is exactly what a TD banker will do for you, because TD can do your 4th, 5th, and 6th rental, whereas most lenders won't. So you don't want to use them up, because then if you're stuck at 4 with TD or 4 with Scotia or 3 with Scotia now, you want to use those later on in the process. So the order in which you actually use lenders is very important, and doing it wrong in the beginning means that it's either extremely costly to restructure, or it might inhibit your ability to buy a property that's a good cash flowing property that you find you could afford. You just can't qualify anywhere residentially. The same thing, this is a little bit outside of direct financing, but work with a realtor who owns rental properties, understands the process with your financing. But also just like I've worked with realtors before that are good realtors, but if you ask a realtor what any realtor that doesn't necessarily own rental properties, this is a good rental property for me to buy, I like it, their answer is almost always going to be yes, this is a great rental property. They don't know why and they're not lying, they just don't know why it's not. Whereas, Santosh and Anthony have brought multiple properties through the suite process. Can you legalize a suite in Calgary? And a lot of realtors will answer that question. A lot of people will answer that question. Of course, you can legalize all suites in Calgary now. Every property you can legalize, you put a suite in. And while that's true from a zoning perspective, if you've got a single attached garage, front drive house, and there's no alley, you can't do that. There's no way to get parking in it. So it doesn't necessarily apply to everything. So you really want to work with a realtor specifically. I know it makes my job easier that understands real estate investments. Sometimes you have a family member, whether that's a mortgage broker or realtor you're kind of stuck working with. If you are stuck with a banker that's your brother-in-law and you can't help but work with them, still feel free to reach out to me. I certainly don't mind still giving some overall guidance. Just tell me up front that, hey, I have to use my brother-in-law. My family will disown me. If not, my wife will divorce me. So, but I'm happy to actually walk through scenarios and how to build out a portfolio and the things that you should take care of first, because the purchase right in front of you, there's an easy way to do that, but there's often a better way to do that isn't the easy way. So get fully pre-approved ahead of time. And the sooner you do that, the better. So if you're going to buy next summer, it's still a good idea to start the process now. There's a lot of things that we need to do. Again, I mentioned first-time buyer. There's RSP strategies. So if you're a new investor here, you don't even own yet, but you want to buy your first property, you're going to do a house hack, you could go get a line of credit right now and buy RSPs with it. And then in 90 days, you can use that RSP for your down payment, but you still get the tax refund. Because of the specific time of year we're in right now, that tax refund, you'll get it actually in the spring. So when you get your refund back this year, you'll actually get it. You don't have to wait the full year. You can actually do that all the way up to typically the 1st of March is when you're able to do that. Only if you're a first-time buyer. Credit corrections, if there's something on your credit that you need to correct, which is becoming more and more often, we're pulling something and we're seeing mistakes on credit. It's too easy to qualify and advertise on your phone to get credit. So little things are happening where we see something that's just incorrect or something that's paid off that's not showing as paid off, and we want to get that stuff corrected prior, which we can do, but it just takes sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to correct things, depending on the scale of why something that is incorrect is there. So we just want to make sure we have time to get ahead of that so that it's not one more thing to deal with when you're about to write an offer and you're in competing offers. Moving credit around. So sometimes we will want to look at paying off debt or adjusting the debt that you have. And sometimes it's getting a line of credit to replace a car loan that has $900 payments but only has 10 payments left. So it's the actual debt servicing on that small amount of debt is hurting your capacity to qualify for something. We can rework that. It just takes a little bit of time to actually organize that. And you don't want to be doing that as you're trying to apply for a mortgage. It becomes challenging for a few different reasons and definitely takes some time. And we want to make sure that we've prepared you for, like a lot of people have a car loan almost paid off and think, okay, well now I've paid this off and I'm going to buy a new car. And it's actually the new payments on the new car are actually lower. Well, we might have been looking at that. So some lenders will actually look at a car payment. If it only has 6 months left, they'll actually count it as paid off. And they'll just ignore it, saying, by the time they're moving in and taking possession in 2 months, another 4 months goes by, it's paid off. We'll just pretend it doesn't exist. Well, if you go reset that car loan, even if the new payment is lower, now we've got to include that whole payment. The biggest thing that we're running into right now is getting the down payment ready. And this is becoming more challenging, I think, because interest rates have gone up. So getting your down payment ready is more expensive than it was a few years ago. And I was talking to Santosh and Anthony about this too, and they're running into the same thing, is that your down payment is, if you're writing an offer and you have equity in your house and that's what you're using for down payment, you can, the struggle with it is we can't do it at the same time, or often we can't do it at the same time. And it definitely takes a while. So you're going to take 2-3 weeks to actually get get the refinance approved or the line of credit approved that you're going to use for your down payment. And then you have to use that, show the bank that's we're purchasing the new rental property with, that's where you're getting it. So we have to have that. We have to be really sure about it being able to go through. And then we also have to be, and then we have to get it done in a very quick time period. And that creates a problem, especially in a market like this, where we're in competing offers. We're in the middle of December right now, so I don't know that there's many competing offers happening, but I suspect early in the year, we're probably going to start to see some of that again. Not on all properties, but definitely on the good rental properties. Investors are still very active. Seasoned investors are very actively writing offers. New investors are itching to, but maybe maybe waiting until early next year. But I do suspect that it's going to come into play. We're not going to have a month long to make a decision on a house. You're going to have to make a decision right away. So the more prepared you are, the better.
What's the longest pre-approval that's provided by your lenders now?
Well, I mean, a pre-approval's indefinite if nothing changes. Like if you're pre-approved for something and your down payment doesn't change and your income doesn't change, you're pretty much pre-approved until the market changes. As in qualify, unless something changes in the actual qualifying rates or ratios, that will have an impact. In terms of a rate hold, typically 120 days, some lenders only do 90. But rate holds right now are relevant. I think most people are pretty aware in the last 4 or 5 weeks. We've seen the bond rate come down almost a full percentage point as of today from kind of where it was hovering a couple of months ago. So, the Bank of Canada went from the end of next year, early 2025, to now the consensus seems to be sometime in the middle of next year is when the Bank of Canada is going to start dropping rates. All the economic data even from the US now is supportive of the idea that rates are going to be coming down. There's no more bouncing around between economic data. It's not kind of bouncing around and coming kind of encouraging rates down. It is pretty consistently, the economic data is slowly pointing towards what's going to be a rally in bonds, which will decrease yields, which will impact the fixed rates, and then the Bank of Canada with the variable rates is going to follow suit shortly after. Fixed rates are already coming down, and I just suspect that that's going to continue into next year.
Can you please tell the exact guidelines for the gifted down payments for the investment properties?
Which one of the 35 lenders are you referring to?
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's very specific. It's really challenging. So for a gifted down payment for a rental property is pretty much no with most lenders. There are a couple of lenders that will allow gifted down payment from a family member though. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. So again, if we have enough time ahead of time, then you can do different things. We could actually structure a private mortgage too. So if you're investing with somebody, you can actually lend them money by giving them a mortgage at a preferential rate on an existing property, right? So there's definitely different ways to organize it. You just need time to do that. You can't do that at the same time. The other thing too is somebody wants to another example would be not specific to your circumstance, but we keep running into this is people they're living in their existing house. They want to keep that property as a rental and they want to buy another property. Well, what we want to do now is refinance that immediately, get as much money as we can. And, either sometimes it's direct cash and that can be a bit of a challenge, or preferably a line of credit so that you're not actually borrowing the money when you're not actually using it yet. Sometimes you have to, it's one of my points ahead, there's going to be some cost associated with doing it. But if you write an offer, then you try and refinance your house. Well, some refinances you can't do for a rental property. And if you're writing an offer for a new principal residence, you can't have both of them be your principal residence. You can't do a refi on a principal residence at the same time as you're writing an offer. However, if you're going to buy next summer and you refinance now, you're living in your principal residence, you can refinance that. And then by next summer, the line of credit's long been set up. The challenge is when the only way to do it, or the only lender that we could do it with, is a lender that doesn't have a line of credit, and we actually have to pull the money out. So that's where it's becoming challenging for people to accept paying a 5.5% interest rate on money that's just sitting in their bank account. So, and what some people are doing is just offsetting that in a 3.5% short-term money market fund or something that can return them, so the loss isn't so great. But there is a cost to that, and it's short-term. But in the long run, it's either you get a significantly higher rate for the duration of the 5-year term, or you can't do it at all. So it really can inhibit your ability to make your next moves in real estate. And it's one of the things that we want to make sure we're doing ahead of time. And that's, if I can stress something, again, everything's specific. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds, because for every question I answer, I'm going to board 90% of the rest of the people. But for what I could stress is just contact your broker ahead of time and start making that plan, so that you can really kind of get your head wrapped around, what your best strategy is. It's going to be a lot of paperwork. Be prepared for that. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm not doing this until next year. It's like, yeah, still get us your tax returns, get us your, maybe not employment letters. Sometimes that's required, but if it's really simple employment, we don't necessarily need it. But tax returns, especially if you already own rental properties, we want to see what those, we want to see how you've been claiming them, because every lender will treat that differently. So some lenders don't even need it. Some lenders, they want to see your tax returns and will use the gross rent on them. Some will not even use rent at all from your rental properties if you haven't claimed it on your taxes yet. So different challenges with different lenders, but the more we know up front, the better, because then we could start planning your down payment or the strategy around the lenders that we know you're going to be able to qualify with. Income docs, down payment. Again, we just talked about down payment. That's the part that's hard to get set up, takes some time. If you do it ahead of time, it's likely going to save you a lot of money. The disadvantage is going to cost you a few $1,000s. You're gonna have to have an appraisal. You're gonna have legal fees. Sometimes there's going to be a payout penalty associated with that, and obviously we have to do the numbers on it. If the payout penalty is too big, it doesn't make sense. But often it's negligible. And right now, if you're paying out and having a payout penalty, but you're also getting a better interest rate, then sometimes it's actually you're going to make up for it with a better interest rate over time, as well as you're preparing yourself for your next purchase. But I will say that people not structuring their mortgage properly and getting the down payment set up ends up costing them tens of thousands not to have it structured properly in the first place. So building out the strategy, this is what we've already touched on a little bit. Which lender to go to first. I love Scotiabank. They are the best lender by far, in my opinion, for mortgages. They have the best product out there that is ideal for purchasing property and then also moving money around and down payment money around to have lines of credit if you want to start trying to, I've actually converted my entire principal residence mortgage into tax deductible interest because I always use my down payment and run it through my Scotia mortgage. So if I've got I had $400,000 left on my Scotia mortgage, every time I had $100,000 to buy another property, I would actually just pay it down on my Scotia mortgage, then reborrow it. So I still have a total of 400, but now 100 of it is borrowed for the purpose of investing. So I can write that off. And after I did that a few times and then covered some renovations that way, my entire mortgage is tax deductible now, even though it's my principal residence. And the paper trail can be lined up that way, but you need the right product for it. So that saves me about $4,000 a year. It's probably more than that now, is what my accountant says, but that's a debt. It's not one time. That's every single year I save $4,000, and it's probably $7,000 now with where interest rates are. So Scotiabank I love, but right now Scotiabank's rates are 1/2 to 3/4 points above the market. So not ideal, but you also may want one on your principal residence. But as I mentioned, Scotia will allow you to have up to 10 properties, but only 3 rentals with them. So maybe 1, maybe 2 properties with them. And then you want to save those for later on in when you're building your portfolio. Then you want to possibly use a monoline or 2. Most of them max out at 2. 2 rentals with them, 4 rentals total. So then you'd want to move back to TD, where they'll go up to 7 and do a few with them. And then back to Scotia for your last couple of properties. 10 is pretty much a hard stop. It's very challenging to get over 10 under residential guidelines. Beyond that, then you have to start looking at commercial. Rates are higher, loan to values are lower. There's a lot of extra costs associated with it. But usually people don't come to me with with 8 properties wanting to build a strategy, usually what it is people are on their third, fourth property or first or second. And I'd say don't worry about 10 if you're buying your second one yet. And I'm talking about pre-planning, but I think people often kind of overlook the next 2 properties and want to know how they're going to get 10. So focus on the next 2 or 3 moves. And it's our job as a mortgage broker that has a rental portfolio. Like I understand these challenges myself because I'm dealing with the exact same thing myself and maxing out last year of what I could put in my personal name. So that's our job to make sure that we're always taking that into consideration. So as you're buying your 4th or 5th property, then we're starting to think, okay, now we really got to strategically make sure we're putting in the best product. And sometimes that does mean we're not going to go with TD. We're going to go with a lender with a slightly higher rate, or we're going to pick TD, even though right now Scotia could give us 20 points better on the rate. But we don't necessarily want to do that. We want to make sure that we're strategically allowing you to buy as many properties as possible, because saving $340 a year isn't gonna cover the fact that you're not able to buy that house that might make you $200,000 or $300,000 over the next 15 years. One of the things is when you're building this, make sure you are going over this with your mortgage broker, is that, who's qualifying. If it's couples, again, if both people could qualify, best to just have one of the people qualify. So if you could qualify with just one of the people, then just only qualify with that person. There's no point in having both of you on there. And that way the second partner, who is now not on that property, so they don't have to debt service all the things associated with your principal residence. Lenders will make us use a shelter cost, but that's $650, $750, depending on the lender. So then all of that secondary person's income goes to debt servicing the shortfall that shows up in a lender's spreadsheets. So depending on the lender and their spreadsheet or the way they calculate rental offsets, if you're making a $500 cash flow on a property, a lender's going to look at it and it's going to show up in their spreadsheet as negative 700. That's just how it goes. So every time you get another property, it's negative 700, negative 700. So that starts to add up a lot. And if you've got 3 properties, a really strong income, that's great as a couple, but it's ideal if you can have one person's income that is only going to show up as $700. So they might be able to buy 6 or 7 properties before that $700 adds up to actually soak up their income. So that's ideal with what we want. Same thing with family members. If you got 2 brothers buying their first house together, one of them can qualify, they're still planning to live together, hey, let's do it this way, and then maybe we can buy a couple of rentals. Kind of the same thing would apply. Joint venture partners, there are so many different versions of how to do a joint venture partner. That one's very specific, so I won't even get into the different scenarios, but obviously come talk to me about what the potential plans are for that. Already went over some of the costs, but if you get yourself set up if you got a big line of credit, for example, if you got a $700,000 line of credit that you have access to, then you can go write an offer on anything. You want to go write an offer on your it's a cash offer, and you're going to get, I don't know, how much can you get off, Santosh? Where did he run off to? What are you going to get off on how valuable is a cash offer when you're in competing offers?
Very valuable.
Yeah,
especially in a competing offer situation. Yeah,
it's for example, the only property I've ever flipped, we just sold, and both myself and Anthony, my partner on it, we were both willing to take $10,000 or $15,000 less if we could get an offer that closed in December. We just want, for our taxes and our numbers, it made it so much simpler for us to have it all closed in November. We were willing to ignore conditional offers and take an offer that we knew for sure would mean that we were going to close it this year. So that was valuable enough to us. But you can't write those offers if you're not ready yet. So often people will start looking and they'll say, well, once I know I'm really going to write offers, then I'll start looking. But that's not what happens. They find a house, they fall in love with it, it fits all their needs, and then they write an offer. And then I just get Santosh and Anthony or someone, I get an email of the offer, hey, here's the offer. It's remember, we talked about this. You can't do this first. We have to do the refinance first. This inhibits our ability to to get the down payment now, or it's going to make it more expensive. Oh, I know, I'm really sorry. I just didn't know I'd find the property, and that just is how it happens. So yeah, talk to your mortgage broker, get as much planned up front as possible. Obviously, sometimes you can still do it. And most often we can still do it. It just means the rate's going to change. So we can still do it. It just means the rate's going to change because now you've got a rental property you're refinancing. Rental rates are higher, or we have to refinance instead of doing a line of credit, because a lot of lenders will do a line of credit on a principal residence, but they won't necessarily do it on a rental property. So not getting financing set up, you might not qualify, might end up with a higher rate, and then you just might not be able to access the equity out of the properties. So always have maxed out equity on your properties. If you're able to qualify and you've got properties that you haven't used the equity in, it's a good idea just to continue to bump that equity up. You don't have to use it, but yeah, always make sure that you've got it available in either lines of credit. And sometimes you have to actually pull the money out, but you might be able to pay down the line of credit on another property, so that you could still maintain keep as much available liquidity as possible without having to pay the interest rate. So different ways to structure and look at that. Just always pay attention to that, because things may change, qualifying rates might go up. Because one of the things that's happened with these increased prices and rents is, of course, rates have gone up. It has made it really hard to qualify. Somebody that made 120 as a couple before now have to make 190 to qualify for the same thing 2 years ago they could have qualified for. And it's one of the things that I missed out on. I didn't even myself, I didn't prep myself for this. I didn't ensure that I was able to, and I can't just go back now and qualify. The rates are 3.5% higher in terms of the qualifying rate. So I can't go access a lot of the equity that I otherwise could have. And that's about it. So there'll probably be a lot of questions. So I encourage anyone to, grab my business card, reach out to me, or talk to me tonight. But if anyone doesn't get a chance to chat with us tonight, I'd say the main thing is get approved up front. Know that it's going to cost you some money to get set up. Even if you don't have a live deal, it's worth it. If you're pretty committed. If you're not sure whether you're ever going to be an investor or not, then it doesn't really matter. But I'd say, yeah, get set up early. Get your down payment set up early, and really it's going to put you in a better position to qualify for more down the road. Any questions? Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah, what about the job transition? Because I know some lenders maybe
yeah, that's actually a really good point. Job transition is one of the job transition you sometimes can't. If you're making a change in your job or career, that's one of the things that we want to know, because sometimes we'll, again, especially with a couple, planning on having a kid, and then one of you's planning on taking a couple of years off until the kid's old enough to go to preschool or kindergarten. Use up the person that's going to be off or taking the new job or going over to commission sales. Soak up their qualifying ability with whatever you can. Get them qualified for every line of credit you can. Try and refinance any property you can into their name alone. And then again, it has that same impact, that because they won't have any income, so you're not using any of that up. So the more credit they have, the more able the other person will be able to qualify by using that liquidity.
So Layne, have you had experience utilizing cash value from whole life insurance as a down payment?
For using cash
value from your whole life insurance, right? So when you have insurance and then it builds up your cash value, and those are
no, I haven't. And I don't know. I know that there are strategies that can be used there. I've never seen anybody residentially use it.
Layne, can you repeat the question?
What's that?
Can you just repeat the question?
Okay, so she's talking about cash value of a whole life insurance policy, and borrowing against that. And I know that's a strategy often for wealthy people. I've only ever seen people worth 20 million plus use that strategy. I've never seen someone that's buying 4 or 5 rental properties be able to use a strategy like that. Lenders just don't count it. So,
yep. Thank you.
Go ahead.
What advice would you give to someone that already have a primary residence
Yeah.
and move to another primary residence? So now the initial primary residence now it's rented.
Yeah.
But, when we look at the rents, when we look at the cash flow compared to what you're going to get at the end of the day, especially the equity that has been built in that house.
Yeah.
You say, okay, sell it off and get a equity house or continue to rent.
Those are numbers you absolutely need to execute, because a lot of people will sometimes you need to do exactly what you say. Like, you need to at least make the assumption that you're maxing out that credit, because I've seen a lot of people that have an 11-year-old property and they're like, oh, this one's such a great rental property, and it's some terrible half duplex somewhere that cash flows, or condo, and they've got and it only cash flows because they only owe 74 grand on it because they bought it so long ago and it's all paid off anyways. It's like, but if you were to max that out, like, you have to actually look at the equity. If you had $230,000 of equity, what could you do with that? And let's do a comparison. So here's how much cash flow you make. Here's how much principal pay down you take. Let's do 200 and say you went out and bought a couple of single family houses with basement suites. Here's what your cash flow would be from that. Here's your principal pay down. Here's your leverage depreciation at 2% or whatever number you want to use, just to do a better comparison. So you have to look at that. It's a really good question to look to ideally look, but you don't want to look at the property as it is. You want to look at it as if it's fully financed, and not, because people do get really stuck on bad properties because they're their best rentals, they're cash flowing like crazy, when really it's just because their mortgage has been largely paid off. So, and then were you asking more specific advice around like qualifying, or just because if you then access the equity on that property that it would make the cash flow negative?
Yeah, no. So no, for me it's my TDS is on red. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at that property. Right now it's cash flow positive.
Yeah.
I'm happy, but by the time I look at the equity on it and the mortgage on it, it's not really looking like it, right? And it doesn't have a basement suite, right?
Yeah.
So there is option of,
Yeah.
should I sell it off? Should I continue to keep it? And also when I look at how much at the end of the day I'm going to, if I didn't sell it as a rental property within a year, definitely,
Yeah.
in the future, and I need to part some money with CRA.
Yeah.
Those are the options. I think probably we could sit down, go down.
Yeah, those are it. But it's a really good point, is that you have to look at those numbers in the exact way that you're suggesting that you do, because you then will see whether it's a good rental property. If we treat it kind of apples to apples comparison with buying another property with 20% down, or assuming you're going to refinance it. So the advantage, as you mentioned, is if you sell it, you have to pay a capital gain. So you don't get to keep using that free government loan effectively. But then you're starting fresh with your new property on that capital gain that you'd be getting there. But what I will say is, if you're in a property and you're like, someday I'll sell this because it's not a great rental property, then that day's today. If it's not a good property and you're eventually wanting to sell it to get into a better property, then do that now. The sooner, there's no point in waiting, because the sooner you execute that, the sooner you have the numbers working in your favor. So, I mean, unless there's something else in your way, like personal life or qualifying, or you just don't have time right now, or you can't find a good property too, is the other one. But largely, if you look at a property and think, someday I'll sell this and get a better property, my advice would be to execute that plan sooner than later, just because why not have all those numbers working for you now instead of 5 years from now. So, but yeah, let's connect and happy to go over those numbers with you.
I have another question, which is
Sure.
if I heard you correctly earlier, there's a possibility that as your properties become more, there is a difficulty in accessing the equity, even if the equity is built. Why is that so? What is leading to that?
It's really just the qualifying with residential underwriting is good and it's bad. It's good because they've simplified it, and it's bad because they've simplified it. But it's also really cheap rates, right? They put everything into a box and think, okay, we've structured out all of the risk as long as you can fit into this box. But then they also don't know how to underwrite. Like, the residential underwriters don't know how to underwrite like a commercial one does. But the commercial underwriter doesn't want to look at your residential purchase or even a fourplex, and they'll do a sevenplex, but they hate you for it. Or they'll try and make you go away by making it hard. So unless you already have a big portfolio with them and they just inject that into your portfolio, they don't like those medium properties because they're used to doing 10 $20 million properties. And that's what they need to be trained on to do those commercial ones. So the problem with residential underwriting is it gets really cumbersome for the underwriters that are structured to do 1 or 2 purchases. So it's a lot of paperwork for them to do. And commercial, they charge fees for all of this. Residential, they don't. So then it just becomes a hassle for them to, for one small mortgage, to do all the paperwork on all of the portfolio. And they don't know how to underwrite it the same way. So they try and create, again, guidelines that capture everything, but most of them just don't want to do it. They just want the easy cookie cutter deals, which are 99% of the deals. We're unique in this room of being investors. And then once you get up to 6, 7, 8, 9, you're further unique as an investor. And they just typically don't want to deal with it.
Can you also please share, because I think how you structure the presentation is really more personal, like qualifying. But if you have a corporation, how does the pre-qualifying when the property will be owned by corporate?
So if we're referring to just residential, so the 1 to 10 purchases, it just makes it significantly harder, and if not impossible, to get to 10. So first of all, it's expensive, and it makes you more liable. So Alberta is a non-recourse mortgage province. So if you go buy a rental property and everything goes wrong and you lose money on it, the bank can take the house. They can't come after you for the shortfall. Now, if you put it in a corporate name, they can and will come after you for it. They'll make you sign a personal guarantee, and they're not allowed to do that unless you put it in a corp. So it's unique to Alberta. Most jurisdictions in North America don't have that. So and then of course there's some accounting costs associated with that too. The only times it makes sense to do that is if you're incorporated and you have an operating company that has a lot of money. In order to get a $100,000 down payment, you're going to have to pull out $120,000. So you're just, of money that you could directly invest. So you have to pay the taxes to pull it out personally, even though you're actually not using it for personal use, you're investing it. That's the only real reason that you would want to do that. All other reasons are basically counterproductive in doing it that way.
Because you can use retained earnings and your CDAs and things like that.
No, you can't. Not residentially. Like I said, the underwriters, the underwriters don't. They don't understand it, and the problem is that even if they could train most of them to, some of them wouldn't get their head. Like there's hundreds of residential underwriters for every major lender across the country, if not thousands with the big banks. There's going to be some that just don't get it. And all they have to do, those people lend a few because they're looking at retained earnings, even though retained earnings might be going down every year. Maybe they add it as income instead of, associating the difference. If they mess that calculation up and lend on for somebody they don't, and they lose money. For every bad, lenders will tell us that for every bad mortgage they lend on that goes into foreclosure, they have to have 30 good mortgages to make up for it. So they will avoid saying yes to good deals in order to avoid a bad deal. So incorporating in Alberta, counterproductive, with the exception of if you have a whole bunch of money in a corp that you'd get taxed on, then often what we can do is there's a couple of lenders that will allow it, and then you can also use a bare trust agreement where you actually finance it in your personal name. You do a trust agreement that basically says that you're holding the property in your personal name on behalf of your corporation. So, and then you can still pay the taxes, do everything from your corp, but you personally are still liable. So, and the banks seem to be okay with that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So, would you throw more light into the bare trust strategy?
So, what's that?
Would you throw more light into the bare trust strategy? The bare
Trust
trust
strategy is what.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bare trust, because sometimes I was doing some research about it, but at some point, someone told me, "Oh, it's an old strategy. Is this something that is still relevant, where your corporation still hold, where you own the property on behalf of the corporation? Is this something that is still relevant?"
Yeah. It's really what we're just referring to. If we need to qualify you with a lender that doesn't allow corporate properties, then you can still disqualify yourself and do a bare trust agreement with your accountant and lawyer to still file your taxes that way. But but you'd still be qualifying personally. And that's also the only good reason to do it is if you have money in your credit. There's no other reason to do it. It makes you essentially more liable. I guess there would be theoretically some liability issues, but you should have $2 million at least in liability anyways. Shouldn't really matter that much. Yes.
Properties, qualify, is it by title or by number of doors?
It depends on the lender. Yeah, and then it further depends on how they interpret it. So Scotia's title. So if you own duplexes, it's just one title still. And then I think National Bank is doors, but basement suites don't count as doors.
Either it's legal ones.
Yep, like legal or illegal don't count as doors, and then some lenders will count all of the doors. So it really depends. But yeah, 10 referring to like if you've got 10 titles in your personal name, it's going to be really tough to get more. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It's to be honest, I've never been able to facilitate it. The most I've been able to do is for myself because I'm a mortgage broker and I can ask for a favor basically, but lenders don't like doing it that way. So once you get to 10, you do have to start going to commercial, and I suspect that I'm on the verge of that where I'm going to have to start moving my stuff into a commercial portfolio and constantly update my lenders on all my taxes and that kind of thing, and that's just the stage you get to at some point. So, and then if I am to do, we are doing a bigger project. It's a $10 million project, and the few of us that are going to have to qualify will qualify, but that'll be different because it'll actually be, because it's commercial financing. When you do commercial financing, they qualify the building and then they check on you to make sure you're not going to drag it down. But it's a cursory check. They want to make sure that nothing in your personal finances is going to drag the building down, but ultimately they qualify the building. So that won't actually really count against me. So as you have bigger commercial, that doesn't count against you. But that's kind of a different stage too. So.
All right. Last
Sure.
question.
Sure.
Okay.
For the DSCR loans, does that help you at all? Does that make it easier?
What do you mean DSCR?
It's the mortgage loan, and it goes off income for the property.
To be honest, I've never facilitated those. Yeah. I find all of those pretty challenging, and often they're really bad deals for the people that use them. They jack up pricing and then work back in funding. So he's asking about like stuff that's, I've seen a lot of affordability programs that CMHC puts out for lower income people to try and qualify and try and use that. And I'd say usually the people that take them should have just stayed renting at the end of the day. So, but we do have to wrap this up. But I'm happy to answer any questions, just because this would go on all night specifically, it's really hard for me to answer in a very general way, very specific questions. So
Yeah.